welcome, aware, inda, dumalang, molo, sobona, hukandat.
There's this whole hidden system kind of shaping how you think, what you do, all that.
Oh, yeah.
That's the mind-bending stuff we're getting into today with Joscha Bach.
Yeah.
He's a cognitive scientist, AI researcher, the whole shebang. And he's arguing that our minds aren't that different from, well, think like seriously complex computer programs. And we've got a ton to unpack from this interview, like how our brains might actually be structured, which is wild, to what this all means for like consciousness, even the future of AI, all of that.
It's a fascinating way to think about it. And it makes you really rethink what it means to be human, especially now with, machines getting smarter and smarter.
Totally. To get us started, Bach uses this really cool example. It's about the game Minecraft to show how something can be real, even if like under a microscope, we can't really see it.
Okay.
So picture this, right? You're looking at a computer running Minecraft, but through this superpowered microscope, you wouldn't actually see, Steve running around or those blocky trees, would you?
Right. No, you'd mostly just see like the electrical stuff, the circuits and all that, just the computer doing its thing.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Even if we can't see it at that level, Minecraft is still a real experience, It has rules. There are consequences to your actions. You're creating this whole world.
And that's exactly Bach's point. It's not about the physical stuff we can see, but the information being processed, the software itself, that's creating the experience of being in that Minecraft world. And our minds, he suggests, might be working in a similar way. Like, we don't see thoughts under a microscope, but they still make a real impact on the world through what we do, how we feel.
So, like, our brains are like the computer, the hardware, and our thoughts, feelings, all that, even our sense of self, that's all part of the software running on top of it.
That's the core of it, yeah. Think of it like money. It's just a concept, really, or a piece of paper. But it has real power in the world because of the systems we've built around it. Our thoughts, even though we can't see them, they have this causal power in our lives.
Wow, yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it. So it's not about the physical stuff itself, but the information it carries, the impact it has.
Right.
But okay, if our minds are like software, does that mean we can like debug ourselves? Like, could understanding our brains this way help us learn better or even approach mental health differently?
Those are some of the big, like, almost philosophical questions Bach's work makes you think about.
Mm-hmm.
And while he doesn't give these cut-and-dry answers, this new perspective could really change how we understand what it means to be human.
It's pretty profound when you think about it that way. Okay, so our minds are potentially like super complex software.
Yeah.
But this is where it gets even more wild, because Bach then says we don't have just one self, but two distinct models, like two versions working together in our minds.
This is where his theory gets really interesting, this interplay between what he calls the outer self and the inner self.
Okay, so there's this part of our mind, the outer self, which is like our, primal operating system. It's generating our initial responses to everything, our gut feelings, those immediate desires.
Yeah, exactly. It's creating the raw data of our experience, the emotions, sensations, all the immediate urges, like the software that keeps, your heart beating, your lungs breathing, all without you having to think about it.
And then there's the inner self, which, this is going to sound weird, but it feels closer to what we normally think of as me. It's the part that's observing those raw feelings, trying to make sense of them.
Yes. The inner self is constantly working to interpret all that data coming from the outer self. It's trying to create a story, make decisions, guide our actions based on what it's understanding.
So it's like this nonstop feedback loop. Our outer self reacts, then our inner self tries to make sense of it, and then decides what to do about it.
Precisely. And it's in that space between those two selves, the outer and inner, where things like self-awareness, being able to reflect on ourselves, even our sense of free will, that's where all that comes into play.
It makes you wonder then, if our inner self is basically just interpreting another model, another system, who or what is really in control, like those Russian dolls where you keep opening them up wondering where the real one is.
It's a huge question. Really makes you think about decision-making, responsibility, even just the cores, who we believe ourselves to be.
This is already making me think about all those times I felt conflicted, like different parts of me are pulling in opposite directions. Is that potentially my outer and inner selves battling it out?
It's definitely possible. Bach's theory gives us a really interesting way to think about those inner struggles.
And this whole idea of the inner self as another layer of software makes me think, if that's how we work, what happens when we introduce AI into the equation? Could AI ever develop these multiple layers of self, too?
That's a question that takes us to the edge of what we understand right now. Bach says, sure, there have been incredible advances in AI, but he's also careful to point out that today, most AI systems are still really good at mimicking intelligence, rather than actually experiencing it the way we do.
So when we see AI writing poems or composing music, it's not necessarily feeling inspired or being creative in the same way humans do.
Exactly. It's more that the AI has learned to recognize patterns, see how things go together, and then replicate those patterns in a way that we humans interpret as creative.
That makes sense. But even if it's not real creativity, AI is still having a massive impact on our world. I'm really curious to hear what Bach thinks about the ethics of it all, especially with all this talk about, AI sentience and all that.
He's very, very clear that this isn't just a tech problem to solve, but a deeply philosophical one, too.
Especially if our own sense of what's right and wrong, those ethical frameworks we use, if that's also a product of this complex software in our brains. How do we even begin to program ethics into AI?
That's the big question. And Bach doesn't act like he have all the answers. But he does say that just trying to code specific rules into AI, that's not going to be enough.
Because rules can be interpreted differently, and there are always going to be exceptions.
Exactly. He's advocating for a way more nuanced approach, something that focuses on developing AI that can learn and adapt its ethical behavior through actually experiencing the world, kind of like how we do.
So more like teaching AI to think for itself about right and wrong rather than just following orders.
You got it. He uses this phrase, second-order ethics, which, okay, I know it sounds a bit jargony, but
Yeah, a little bit. Haha. Can you break that down for us?
basically it's the ability not just to follow the rules, but to really think about those rules, to question them, maybe even change them based on the situation. It's about developing AI that can deal with how messy and complicated the real world is, just like humans have to do every day.
So we're talking about AI that can not only learn from messing up, but also question its own programming, its own sense of what's right. That's asking a lot, even for people, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. And it shows just how big of a task this is, creating truly ethical AI. But Bach doesn't shy away from how hard this is. In fact, he actually sees it as an opportunity.
An opportunity, how so?
He thinks that trying to figure out AI ethics, wrestling with all these questions, can help us humans understand our own morals better. Like if we have to break down our values into a way a machine can get it, it forces us to really examine those values ourselves.
It's like we're holding up a mirror to our own sense of right and wrong. So where do we even begin? If we're serious about creating ethical AI, what are the actual steps?
One of the most important things Bach talks about is having diverse data to train these systems.
Mhm.
Right now, a lot of AI is trained on data that doesn't represent everyone's experiences.
So if we only show an AI a limited view of the world, it's going to have a really skewed understanding, and the decisions it makes will reflect that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like imagine trying to teach someone how to cook, but you only give them recipes for, like, Italian food. They might be amazing at pasta, but their understanding of cooking is limited, right? We need AI that's been exposed to all kinds of cultures, viewpoints, every ethical dilemma you can think of.
It's like that saying, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. We need AI that's not just smart, but wise.
Perfectly said. And beyond just the data itself, Bach emphasizes how important transparency is when we're building AI. Right now, a lot of how those systems work, it's hidden in lines of code, a black box.
So we might not even know why an AI does something, we just see the result. That doesn't seem great. It sounds like it could lead to mistrust and maybe even people using it for bad stuff.
It's a huge concern, definitely. Bach argues that if we want people to trust AI making ethical decisions, we need to be able to understand the why behind those decisions. This means coming up with new ways for making AI's thought process transparent, something anyone can understand, not just the programmers.
So it's about a fundamental change in how we approach AI from the ground up. It's not enough to make it smart. It has to be understandable and match up with human values in a way that makes us trust it.
That's the heart of it, yeah. Bach sees this as a team effort, not just with AI researchers, but also involving ethicists, people making policies, even the public. Everyone has a stake in this.
It makes you realize this isn't just about the future of technology, but the future of humanity. AI has the potential to change everything, and it's up to us to steer it in the right direction.
Couldn't agree more. What do you think? Does Bach give us the answers?
Honestly, he doesn't give us easy answers. But he does give us a new way to think about the future we're creating with AI. It's a future full of potential, but we have to be careful and we have to look inward at ourselves at the same time.
It's interesting how we use the phrase living in the moment. Bach takes that idea pretty literally with his idea of consciousness. He calls it a bubble of nowness, and it's every bit as interesting as it sounds.
That's a powerful image, this bubble. So how does he define it? What does it actually mean for us day to day?
So Bach, he describes consciousness as second-order perception. It's not just experiencing something, like seeing a beautiful sunset, but also being aware that we are the ones having that experience.
So it's like our consciousness is a step removed, watching us experience the world as if we were someone else, almost like having a built-in commentator narrating our lives.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And within this space of awareness, this bubble, that's where Bach says contradictions can't exist. Our conscious mind is constantly trying to smooth things out, make a coherent story out of all the sensory information that's hitting us all the time.
That makes me think about those optical illusions where you can see two different images in one picture. Our brain can't process both at the same time, so it switches back and forth. Is that kind of like what he's getting at?
That's a really good comparison. Our consciousness, in this bubble of nowness, it wants to create a single, unified experience of the world. It's always resolving conflicts, finding a balance between those competing desires and interpretations we were talking about earlier.
It really makes you realize how active consciousness is. It's not just passively watching, it's shaping how we experience reality.
Exactly. And this goes right back to Bach's main point about the mind being like software. If our conscious experience is just a result of all this complex information processing, then figuring out how those processes work could be the key to understanding consciousness itself.
Okay, I'm with you. So if our minds work this way, what about artificial minds, the AI we're creating? Could AI ever have this second-order perception, this bubble of nowness that Bach's talking about?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
It gets at the edge of everything we know. Bach recognizes how amazing AI has become, but he also makes it clear that most AI today is really good at mimicking intelligence, not experiencing it the way humans do.
So even when we see AI that can write poems or compose music, it's not actually feeling inspired or being creative in the same way that we do.
Exactly. It's more like the AI has figured out patterns, how things fit together, and then replicates those patterns in a way that humans read as creative.
Okay, that makes sense. But even with those limitations, AI is changing our world incredibly fast. I want to hear what Bach thinks about the ethical implications of all this.
He's very upfront about this not being just a technical problem to solve, it's a deeply philosophical one.
Especially if how we determine right and wrong, our ethical frameworks, if that's a product of this complex software in our own brains, how can we even begin to program that into AI?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And Bach doesn't pretend to have all the answers. But he does say that simply trying to program specific rules into AI, it's not going to cut it.
Because rules can be interpreted in different ways, plus there are always exceptions to the ruler, right?
Exactly. He's for a much more nuanced approach, one that focuses on AI that can learn and adapt its own sense of ethics by interacting with the world, making mistakes, just like people do.
So it's more about teaching AI to think for itself about these moral dilemmas rather than just blindly following a set of instructions.
That's the idea. He uses the term second-order ethics, which I know might sound a little jargony.
Yeah, just a tad. Could you break that down for us? What does that actually mean?
It means being able to not just follow rules, but to also think about those rules, to be able to question them, adjust them to fit the situation, that kind of thing. We're talking about AI that can deal with the complexities of the real world just like we have to.
So we're talking about AI that can not only learn from making mistakes, but can also question its own ethical programming. That's a pretty high bar to clear, even for us humans.
You're telling me. And it really highlights how difficult it will be to create AI that is truly ethical. The good news is that Bach doesn't shy away from this challenge at all. He actually sees it as an opportunity.
An opportunity? How so?
Bach believes that by trying to solve the puzzle of AI ethics, by wrestling with all these complex questions, it can actually help us humans to better understand our own morality. Think about it. If we have to break down our values and our ethical decision-making processes in a way that a machine can understand, it forces us to examine those values more closely ourselves.
It's like we're holding up a mirror to our own sense of right and wrong. So where do we even begin? If we want to create AI that can make ethical decisions, what are the first steps?
One of the most crucial things Bach talks about is the importance of diverse training data. Right now, a lot of AI is being trained on data sets that don't actually represent the full range of human experiences and perspectives.
So if we're only feeding an AI information from a limited point of view, it's only going to have a very narrow understanding of the world. Or, and of course, any ethical decisions it makes would reflect that limited understanding.
Exactly. It's like trying to teach someone to be a chef, but only giving them recipes from one type of cuisine. Sure, they might become incredible at making, say, Italian food, but their understanding of cooking as a whole will always be limited. What we need is AI that has been exposed to a diverse range of cultures, different viewpoints, and all sorts of ethical dilemmas.
It's like they say, a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing. We need AI that's not just intelligent, but also wise.
Couldn't put it better myself. And beyond just making sure the data itself is diverse, Bach also stresses the importance of transparency in how we develop AI. Right now, much of how these systems work is obscured, hidden behind layers of code. It's like a black box that we can't see into.
So we might not actually know why an AI makes a particular decision, we just see the end result. That doesn't exactly sound like a recipe for trust. In fact, it sounds like it could easily lead to people distrusting AI or even misusing it.
It's a very real concern, absolutely. Bach argues that if we truly want people to trust AI to make sound ethical choices, we need to be able to understand the reasoning process behind those choices. This means creating new ways to make the decision-making of AI transparent, something that anyone can look at and understand, even if they aren't programmers.
So we're talking about a fundamental shift in how we think about and create AI. It's not just about making these systems smarter, it's about making them understandable and compatible with human values in a way that fosters trust.
That's the crux of it, absolutely. Bach sees this as a collaborative effort that goes beyond just AI researchers and engineers. He believes it needs to include ethicists, policymakers, and even the general public. Everyone has a stake in this.
That's a great point. When you think about it that way, it really drives home the point that this isn't just about the future of technology, it's about the future of humanity. AI has the potential to reshape everything about our world, and the responsibility falls on us to ensure that it's a future we actually want to live in.
I couldn't agree more. So what do you think? Do you feel like Bach gave us the answers?
Honestly, I don't think he gives us easy answers to these incredibly difficult questions. But what he does do is give us a new framework for thinking critically and ethically about the future we're building with AI. It's a future brimming with potential, but also one that demands that we approach these technologies thoughtfully and with a healthy dose of self-reflection.
I think that's the hallmark of a truly thought-provoking conversation, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
It's not always about finding all the answers, but rather about making sure we're asking the right questions.
Absolutely.
And for everyone listening out there, keep those questions coming. Don't be afraid to really explore these ideas, talk about them, share them. Who knows? Maybe together we can create a future where humans and AI can thrive.
Well said. Until next time, everyone, keep diving deep.